I just want to, again, thank you not just for being here, but being engaged and involved and interested in the Illinois governor's race, because that's what She Votes Illinois is all about. Our mission is to maximize the involvement and engagement of Illinois women in all aspects of government and politics. So the organization started really organically. After the November election, you can groan, you can cry, whatever, on cue there. After the November election, Democratic elected officials in Springfield started to think what we could do on the state level to fight back against the Trump agenda. At the same time, activists and many of you in this room were getting involved thinking the exact same thing, the same mission to push for our democratic values, things like access to abortion rights, LGBTQ equality, immigrant and refugee rights, and the list goes on, as you know. So Liz and I became friends, and we're sitting together and having coffee and decided we really need to kind of get everybody together pushing in the same direction, and that we not only have a fight on the national level, we have a fight right here in Illinois. We have a big problem in the governor's mansion, and we need to address that problem. And his name is Bruce Rauner. So we saw all this energy after the election. We saw it played out with the creation and organization of groups such as Indivisible. Many of us in this room attended the Women's March, which was an unprecedented show of engagement of women. Organizations like We Will, formerly Mom Plus Baby, continued to stay engaged and push their legislators to do the right thing. So there was a silver lining in the cloud of Trump's election, and that's that we've all come together and we're here together tonight. So as the months continue and we march toward the election of hopefully a new Democratic governor, I hope we all continue to work together and push in the same direction, because tonight is just the beginning, is what is going to be a collaborative effort. I couldn't be prouder to be a part of this group, and although I was one of the people that came up with the idea for the organization, I didn't do the work. Here's who did. The planning committee for She Votes Illinois in tonight's event include Liz Kirchhoff, Maureen Keene, Monique Rooker, Colleen Smith, all with our newly created organization, She Votes Illinois. A big part of the planning, Robin Dusak with Indivisible Illinois, Mrinalini Chakraborty, National Field Director at Women's March, and Amanda Drenth with Women's March Illinois. Alexandra Eidenberg with We Will, formerly Mom Plus Baby, and a special thanks to Emily Rosenwasser, Marissa Miller, and Jessica Olson for volunteering as well, and all the other people that came and joined us to volunteer this evening. A special thanks to our sponsors, who are Nasty Women, Personal Pack, Men for Choice, and the Iron Workers Union. We look forward to engaging and working with you in the months to come. Thank you so much for being here. And now I'm going to introduce our fabulous moderator for this evening, Liz Kirchhoff.
Hi, thanks everyone so much for being here. You know, I so appreciate the fact that everyone is so interested and engaged in the governor's race that they will come out on a late October weeknight evening to hear from our candidates. And of course, I also want to give a very sincere thank you to Representative Ann Williams. So Ann has been an incredible supporter and mentor to She Votes Illinois and to everyone on the planning committee. And she didn't mention it, but this idea, or this forum, was actually originally her idea. She put her full faith in us and her full support and mentorship in us to make this happen, so thank you very much. None of us would be in the room tonight without her. And so we're all here to hear from our candidates, so without further ado, let's meet the Democratic gubernatorial candidates. starting from the far end, we have Mr. J.B. Pritzker. We have Mr. Chris Kennedy. We have Mr. Tio Hardiman. We have Mr. Bob Diber. And we have Mr. Daniel Biss here tonight. And I'll start addressing the candidates at this point. We all want to say thank you very much for taking the time out of your hectic schedule on the campaign trail to come out tonight and spend an evening focusing on the issues that are important to women. We'd like to start tonight's forum with a statement from each of you. First, I'm just going to go over a little bit of the details about how tonight's forum will go. I'm going to be asking questions that we wrote that cover a broad range of interests important to the women of Illinois. Our four main topics are going to be focused on violence against women, education, employment, and healthcare. And each of you will get 2 minutes to answer each question. You will all get a chance to answer every question. Out of fairness to you as candidates, if another candidate calls your name out, says something about you, in their response, you'll get a 30-second rebuttal. And to also ensure fairness again, we used random drawing names out of the hat to pick the order of how you will answer each question. And on a side note, we've written the questions that we're going to ask you tonight to focus issues that are important to women, of course, but also to focus on issues that are at the state level. We encourage you to answer in a way that will help us all understand what you see as your role as governor of Illinois and how you plan to act within that role to prioritize the unique needs of women in Illinois. And we've also written tonight's questions in a way that prioritizes the inclusivity of all women in the state. It's important that we, in our questions, and then you in turn in your answers, recognize the unique ways that things like race, sexuality, gender identity, disability status, and other factors influence our experience as women. So the women of Illinois, of course, we're diverse, we're engaged in politics, and we very much look forward to learning more about your stances, your plans for the future, and your experiences in the issues that are most important to us. And then one final note to our audience tonight, just to keep everything moving along so we can get to as many questions as possible, we just ask that you hold all applause until the end of the event. Applause or other reactions. I'm sure it will all be applause, gentlemen. So let's meet our candidates. We're going to go right down the line from A to Z starting out to give our opening statement, starting with Mr. Biss.
Well, good evening, and thank you very much, Liz. Thank you to the organizers. I'm so looking forward to this forum and this conversation. I think it's a conversation that's rooted in exactly what this political moment is all about. My name is Daniel Biss. I'm state senator in the 9th District. I'm running for governor of Illinois. None of this stuff was what I planned to do with myself. I came to Chicago in 2002 to start teaching math at the University of Chicago, and saw 6 months later a nation rushing off to war, a president lying to us, and a movement rising up in the streets that I felt I had to join. I started knocking on doors, going block to block and neighborhood to neighborhood, and fell in love with this idea that movements could change society. Well, here we find ourselves 15 years later with a president lying to us, and a resistance movement growing, a resistance movement led by women, a resistance movement in response to an incredible misogynist and serial assaulter in the White House. And we've got 5 men on this stage, and the state capitol is being rocked by a scandal of sexual harassment and sexual assault and worse. And I think it's time for us to acknowledge that we live in a society of deep, systematic oppression. Deep, systematic oppression of women, deep, systematic oppression of people of color, of African Americans, and of Latinos. And these forms of oppression, whether it's the structures that result in a whole bunch of men as the CEOs of the biggest corporations and running our government, whether it's the forms of oppression that enable harassment and assault, whether it's the forms of oppression that result in massive pay gaps, or the forms of oppression that results in girls being treated differently than boys in math class. It is time for us to build a political movement to rewrite the rules, demolish the oppression, and create genuine fairness. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Diber.
Thank you, and it's great to be here this evening. I'm Bob Diber. I'm a candidate for governor. I'm from Southern Illinois. I reside in Madison County, which is Edwardsville, which is right near St. Louis. I'm the only candidate from the southern part of the state in the race, and I'm running because I believe that we need to unite all of Illinois. And to do that, I picked a running mate from the city of Chicago. He's from the Austin community, and some of you have not met him, but he's here tonight. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Todd, who's standing over there. So thank you, Jonathan, for being here. Jonathan and I have gotten to know each other over the course of my time that I had been in the city of Chicago and been campaigning, and came to an agreement on many things in the agenda. And one of them is that we both support the passage of an Equal Rights Amendment. As you know, Illinois has not done that, and that needs to happen, okay? And if I become governor, I will follow through on that, so thank you very much. We need to get that job done as a top matter of business. But I want to tell you, for 28 years, I was a high school teacher, and I was a career and technical teacher in an era when you taught young girls, and they called it non-traditional careers. And I helped a lot of young ladies get into the construction trades. And there was something that I really liked about what happened when they became apprenticed. They were treated equally as any male. And their wage scale when they became a journeyman, whether it was a carpenter, an electrician, a plumber, a pipe fitter, was the same as a male. And I think organized labor has best demonstrated for all genders fairness in the workplace, because there is no difference between a male and female in organized labor. I'm proud of the fact that my staff that works for me as regional superintendent is 80% female. And I have great relationships because I build my office on one word. It's called respect. And I think that's what all women want. And that's what I'm about. So thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hardiman.
Yes, I'm T.O. Hardiman. I'm running for governor. This is my second run for governor. We ran for governor in 2014 and secured close to 30% of the state vote. I'm the only minority candidate in this race for governor. And my running mate, her name is Patricia Avery. She's from Champaign County. She's a former director of the NAACP in Champaign-Urbana, and she's a former county commissioner in Champaign. I'm running for governor because I talk to people statewide, and people ask me to run again. We have a 2020 plan, which represents a perfect vision for the good people of Illinois, which includes the senior citizens, the college students, the veterans, everybody in Illinois, the poor, the middle class, and the working class people. I'm the only non-billionaire candidate running. I would like to be seen as an alternative to the billionaires. I just want to be honest with you. And I want to say this as well. I want to salute Sister Amina. Sister Amina was one of my first violence interrupters. She's a world humanitarian. Now, stand up, Amina, just to give her props there. She just overcame a bout with cancer, too. So I want to just say that to you, okay? And then also, just to get this in there, I just want to tell you a little bit about my background. I'm a family man, been married for 18 years. During my career at Ceasefire, I helped rescue 12 women from a prostitution ring on the west side. Also, I helped save the lives of 2 transgender women a couple of years ago. And on top of that, a lot of the good work that's been done here in Illinois. So we're running, we have a strong plan which supports the progressive tax in Illinois and the financial transaction tax here in Illinois, which can bring in $5 billion of new revenue. And as we began to talk tonight, I also have plans in the domestic violence arena. As a matter of fact, I would like to have the Hardiman and Avery Leave No Woman Behind Domestic Violence Act once I become governor in 2019 when they swear me into office. I'm running all the way. I'm confident in our plan. Say no to the billionaires. I'm the only candidate that's running that's a non-billionaire, and I'm a minority running for this position. And I want to thank you all for listening to me, and we plan to share more information later. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
So I think we all want the same thing. Not just the people on the stage, but everybody in this audience. Everybody who's watching this on television or maybe listening on the radio. We all want equal rights for every American, which demands that we have equal rights for every woman. That means that we have to have a series of changes in our laws. We need to make sure that we have child care so that women can have a paid maternity leave. They can either continue to work or avoid this notion that a gap in a resume is some sort of threat to their long-term career. We need to make sure that we have health care for all, including access to abortion services, if that's the choice that a woman wants to make. We need a civic and business community that cheers on and encourages women to rise through the ascendancy of leadership and lead once they're at the top of those companies. We want all of those things. I have to say, though, that they pale in comparison to a much larger challenge. And that challenge is around the culture of violence towards women that is present in our society. I'll say this, I don't think, well, I know I don't know a single woman who has not been the victim of sexual violence, sexual assault, or rape. It's a big statement. And my guess is that every single person in this audience could make the same one. We need to change that. For too long, for decades, we had a culture of silence across our entire country, our whole culture, and in our government too. That needs to end, and it'll end if I'm governor. It'll end because of the women that I surround myself with. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Pritzker.
Well, thank you to Liz and to the organizers here and to all of you for spending your evening here, and of course my fellow candidates. I decided to run for governor because everything that I care about, everything that we care about is under siege by Bruce Rauner and his misogynist, xenophobic, racist partner in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump. Now, I grew up in a home where my parents were fighting for economic and social justice. It's what we were taught as kids. And so it shouldn't be at all surprising that as I have grown up, that I've been engaged in the fight for women's rights, for women's health, for LGBTQ rights, for civil rights. And that as an adult, I've helped to do some pretty big things across the state of Illinois to help people. 230,000 kids that get school breakfast across the state because I helped to expand President Obama's No Kid Hungry program. Thousands of kids who get quality preschool and child care in this state because of the work that I've done for more than 20 years in that field. Helping to build a Holocaust museum that teaches more than 60,000 kids every single year to stand up and fight bigotry and hatred and intolerance, and thousands of teachers who take it back to their classrooms every year. I created 1871, which has created more than 7,000 good-paying jobs in the state. These are all big things that I've gotten done, but I tell you that because we've got some big things we need to do in this state today. We've got to stand up for pay equity. We've got to make sure that we're building out infrastructure for domestic violence treatment. We've got to make sure that we've got a progressive income tax in this state, that we legalize marijuana and tax it, that we raise the minimum wage, which will help us with pay equity. Lots of big things that need to get done. You're going to need somebody who's got a history of doing those things. I have, and I'll do those things as governor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. So, as I mentioned before, our first topic tonight is going to be violence against women. Obviously a very timely, couldn't be a more timely topic. We're going to start our first question on something that is very local to our state, which is the former state budget impasse. And for our candidates, the order that you're going to answer, we're going to go Mr. Biss, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Hardiman, Mr. Diber, and Mr. Pritzker. So, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, Illinois just this year passed a state budget after an unprecedented 2-year impasse in which our state had no budget. As of March 2017, nearly 70% of state agencies have received no payments or only partial payments from the state in this year, compared to only 35% of agencies last year. And this is according to a study conducted by the United Way of Illinois. The survey also found that replacing these funds has been challenging for agencies. 9 out of 10 agencies said they were unable to raise 25% or more of the funding owed to them by the state. Domestic violence shelters and rape crisis centers have been hit hard by the budget crisis, with many still completely unfunded. If you are elected, you may encounter a legislature that disagrees on different budget priorities. What will you do to ensure that these life-saving services for women remain funded during any future budget crisis? And Mr. Biss.
Yeah, that question really gets at the heart of what's been so implausible and destructive in these last few years. I spent time in Carbondale talking with Sheila Simon about the Women's Center, an entity that she's on the board of that acts as a shelter for victims of domestic violence and their children. And what they had found during the course of the budget impasse is that more and more and more of their clients were coming from further and further and further away because the radius of closure, the distance from that center around that center where every single other similar provider had shut down was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. This is a question of life and death. And your question exactly describes the problem, which is that we had all sorts of policy disagreements with Bruce Rauner, and he was committed to, instead of putting those disagreements aside and working to pass a budget so we could fund core services and literally keep people alive, instead he did what he could to stop there from being a budget. The question is, what are your priorities? The question is, what is your job? And the fundamental job, the first job of the governor of Illinois is to keep the state going. The first job is to have a budget that invests in communities. The first job of government, period, is to provide for vulnerable people and communities who are reliant on the community, the state as a whole, to get through the day. And so the answer to the question is, that's where you start. I'll have all kinds of fights with Mike Madigan and John Cullerton and the Republican leaders of the legislature when I'm governor. I'll stand up for my values, I'll stand up for our values, but I won't let those fights get in the way of having a government that fulfills its most fundamental sacred responsibility, which is to lift up people who without those services cannot live.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
There's been a relentless attack on the 800 social service agencies that exist in our state. It's a terrible decimation of what was once one of the great social safety nets anywhere in the United States. Today, the largest overnight shelter for teenagers in the city of Chicago is the Chicago Transit Authority. Half of all the mental health centers in the city of Chicago alone have been closed. We've robbed women's shelters of funding, not just in Chicago, all over the state. What's happening in our state is incredible. There's a relentless economic gentrification. We didn't have a budget standoff. We had an attack by a libertarian government on poor people in our state. A relentless attack on those poor people resulted in this, a shrinking economy, but average household income the last measurable years jumping 10%. That's nearly impossible to do, to have an economy that's not growing and have average household income jump 10%. It jumped because any family with a sick child or a disabled brother or sister, elderly parents who needed home health care, could not rely on those 800 social services to provide that any longer. And they were forced to leave our state. We've used economic gentrification to push the poor out of our state, and we're using racial gentrification to push people of color and the poor out of the city of Chicago. We're shutting down neighborhood schools. We're cutting off access to safety net hospitals. We're decreasing the number of police so crime goes up, and we're allowing grocery stores to close so people live in food deserts. We have racial gentrification at the city level, economic gentrification at the state level, and both need to end.
Thank you. Mr. Hardiman?
Yeah. When it comes down to supporting domestic violence programs statewide, any governor with a real conscience would never shut down a domestic violence center. So that's why I'm pushing forth the Hardeman and Avery Leave No Woman Behind, the Domestic Violence Act, which when a phone call goes in for domestic violence, even if the charges are dropped, we're going to follow up with the women for 90 days and then for another 6 months to make sure everything is okay. There are resources that we have to bring into the state to reopen some of the domestic violence shelters. I've been volunteering at domestic violence shelters for the last 3 years, meeting and talking to the women that have been victims of domestic violence. I'm also one of the keynote speakers every year in Boston for the Women for Justice and Equality Women's Conference, nationwide conference. So I have expertise in that area to help support women, but most important, we need to open up these domestic violence shelters so women will have somewhere to go if they run into an incident. And I grew up in the heart of the ghetto, people. I'm just going to be honest with you. I grew up in the Henry Horner projects. I saw a lot of violence when I grew up as a young man as well, so I understand both sides of it. So women have to be protected, and as leaders, we should protect women. Anybody that would close a domestic violence shelter because of budget constraints, that's dead wrong. So what I plan to do is a House Bill 453. That's the financial transaction tax, which can bring in $3 billion of new revenue here in the state of Illinois. I plan to use at least $30 million of that money to reopen domestic violence shelters and make sure we leave no women behind. I'm not just saying that to sound good. I'm sincere about it as I'm running for governor. So that's my plan to address that issue. And Bruce Rauner is dead wrong for shutting down, Bruce Rauner and Rahm Emanuel, I must say that, for shutting down mental health institutions here in Chicago and statewide. And he's dead wrong for shutting down domestic violence shelters. We must stand up and protect all people, but women should be number one. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Diber?
Yes, you know, as a regional superintendent, I go to domestic violence shelters because there's children there, not just women. Because women had to leave their homes to be safe, and their kids went with them, okay? So in light of that, these shelters are so important, especially to school-age children, to be living in an environment of nonviolence. And I chose my running mate based on the fact that he does social service work and that he does outreach work in this community as I do in my community. So, you know, we have a problem in this state with being able to pay agencies. And I was glad today that we did issue $4 billion worth of bonds that begins to pay some of these bills down. But we got to do a lot more than that. Because until all these agencies receive their funding, can they open and can they remain open in the capacity that they have? So I've said way on back in February when I announced that I would run, that I would bond out the whole debt of unpaid bills, the whole $14.5 billion, because all agencies need to be funded. And that's where we begin to save money. Now, we reinvested today $4 billion of bonds at 3% interest. That's a whole lot better than paying the 6 that we were on that $4 billion worth of debt. So I think we're beginning to do the right thing. But we've got to get all of these agencies paid so that they can move on and provide the services. And I want to say this just about domestic violence. I don't know how many people in this room have witnessed it, but it left a mark on me when I watched a neighbor of mine be abused by her husband physically in the yard. And you know why? You know what happened to her? She had no place to go, so you know what happened? She got abused again. So any woman that doesn't have a shelter to go to, they've only got one thing to go back to, and that's more abuse. So these shelters are so important for the dignity of society and the dignity of women to have an end to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pritzker?
What Bruce Rauner has done to the safety net in the state is unconscionable, immoral. And every one of us, by the way, would stand up and reverse the damage that he's done to the state. It's also important to recognize last year 53,000 people didn't get, survivors of domestic violence, didn't get services because of what Bruce Rauner did to that safety net, particularly in domestic violence. 53,000 people not being served. So what's important is to elect somebody who's got a plan. And I've put a plan out to make sure that we rebuild infrastructure for domestic violence services in this state, to make sure that the services that get delivered are trauma-informed intervention services. Very important to make sure the training is proper. And then we've got to make sure that the survivors, the parents, are getting counseling and legal services that we, again, make shelters available to them and job training, because they're not going back to their spouse, and many need that job training to go on with their lives and their families. And then the children. We have got to intervene on behalf of those children at schools most often. Make sure the services are available in schools so that they're getting the counseling in schools, they're getting the prevention services, detection is made in the schools. But you've got to have somebody who's putting forward a plan. I've done that before this forum. I've done that, a while ago. Want to make sure that people know that I will stand up and rebuild the Illinois Council Against Sexual Assault and the Illinois Council Against Domestic Violence, and make sure with a progressive income tax that we are paying for those services.
Thank you. And a note to our candidates, I'm so sorry, I don't think there's water in those pitchers. We're taking care of that right now. Our apologies. We will take care of you. Well, that was a good moment of levity. Our next question is on the topic of sexual harassment and domestic violence. And the order that we're going to be answering is going to be Mr. Diber, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Biss, Mr. Pritzker, and then Mr. Hardiman. Over the past 2 weeks, the hashtag #MeToo has become ubiquitous on Facebook and Twitter, with women sharing stories of sexual harassment and assault, or simply just sharing the hashtag #MeToo. This past week, an open letter from the Women Who Make Illinois Run, which included 129 women in all, detailed the experiences of sexual harassment and misogyny perpetuated by legislators in Springfield. Tell us about your reaction to these campaigns generally and the letter from Springfield specifically, and how it impacts what you plan to do as governor. Mr. Diber.
Well, first, I really respect those who stood up and spoke out. So I take my hat off and applaud them, because had they not spoke out, we would just be hearing about it one more place, again, by some other celebrity that maybe did it on TV, as we also have heard about this past week, okay? So the bottom line is that if you don't speak out, it's not going to be stopped, okay? We have to activate and stop sexual harassment in our society, and it boils down to a word that I used in my opening statement, and that's respect. Respect is the bottom line of upholding dignity to one another as human beings, as professionals, in the workplace, in the social setting, in our society at large. And I think for far too long, we have not, let's say, just done that, and that, we have a president who had an issue with it when he was running for president, okay, in the campaign. And he said, well, it was locker room talk. Well, that I don't think is socially acceptable. And I think that that's why it is so important that we say no to this kind of activity. And as governor, I would not tolerate it. I would not tolerate it with my staff. I would not tolerate it in the Capitol. And I wouldn't tolerate it in the state. And so with that said, just in closing, respect and upholding the dignity and the rights of all human beings is just so important. And I think that's where we really need to focus.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
I too would applaud what I consider absolute bravery. People going and putting their careers and jobs on the line by exposing their bosses, people who determine their customers, their clients, the future, the bills they care about, and their careers. I think what we're seeing coming out of Springfield is daunting and disgusting, and I think it needs to end. I think about all of the folks in Illinois and how they're suffering as well. If we can take the most powerful women in our state and subject them to that level of abuse, what's happening to everyone else? What's happening to transgender kids, teenagers, who have no access to a network of people who can defend them, who are subject to sexual assault and rape in incredible numbers? The poor, who have no access to the types of agencies and community organizations that populate wealthier neighborhoods, and if they did, have had those agencies robbed of their funding in the last 18 months. African American families who have been increasingly isolated, for whom there is less and less help every day, particularly for women who lead those families. Latino families, and in particular undocumented families, who now have a choice when they call the police and want to report domestic violence. Are they going to have their loved one who may be in a period of great extremis, are they going to have them deported as a result of that phone call? And are they therefore less likely to make that phone call? Everybody in our state is hurting. But to have the people who were elected to protect us to be the perpetrators and to protect the people who are the perpetrators, I think is something that none of us would stand for. Only one way to cure it, and that's to put people who are women in power. Thank you all.
Thank you. We're going to hold our applause, please. Mr. Biss?
So there was real heroism on display by a series of women who had been the victims of harassment and assault specifically because of a power dynamic that left them vulnerable, who nonetheless spoke out in recent days. Katie McFadden, who spoke on the record using her own name to the press. Caitlin Duncan, who was among the group initiating that letter that I've now signed on to. My running mate, Letisa Wallace, and I have introduced legislation to mandate not only training, but real reporting, mechanisms where anyone in the state capitol can report these kinds of awful incidents as they happen. But I really appreciate the way you asked the question about how we felt as these movements grew over the course of the last few weeks. Listen, I've been in the state legislature since 2011, and I have not believed what I've seen in that building. I couldn't believe the conduct. I couldn't believe the systematic disrespect for women, disregard for women, ignoring of women, silencing of women, and yes, harassment and worse of women. And I've done my best during my time in the legislature to be a force in the opposite direction, to lift up women's voices, to support women who are being marginalized, to support women's work. But I think we all need to tell the truth and say that we've not done enough. I have not done enough. And so how have I felt during the course of these last 2 weeks? I have tried to think as sincerely as I can and as deeply as I can about what moments I've let pass where I could have been a better ally. What moments I've allowed to slip by where there was an opportunity to support someone in need of support or to put someone who needed to be told off in their place. I'm going to be looking hard for more of those opportunities. I'm going to find them every time I can. We all need to do better.
Thank you. Mr. Pritzker?
Now more than ever, we need women in positions of power in Springfield and elsewhere. And I've tried to do my part to promote that. My running mate, State Representative Juliana Stratton, I've supported many, many candidates for office, women, across the country and here in Illinois. It's important that we change the power dynamic. We also need to make sure that we recognize the courage of the women who've come forward in the last few weeks, as well as the many women who haven't, who've shared the stories privately and have been unable, because of the power dynamic, to really come forward. We all ought to recognize that and honor that courage. Now, of course, we need to institute training and reporting mechanisms in Springfield. That seems like a very important thing to do, but a no-brainer. We also, though, have so much more that we need to do. I really believe that it's incumbent upon men to take this moment and say that if you're in a position of power, if a woman comes forward and speaks out about what's happened to her, sexual harassment, that we need to say loudly, I believe you, because I don't think that's happened often enough.
Thank you. Mr. Hardiman?
Yes, when it comes down to the Me Too movement, I support it totally 100% with the Me Too movement. But the elephant in the room is that women have been abused and sexually harassed for decades, and we must do a better job of bringing it to the light of the whole entire world. We have to say no to that type of behavior. The reality in Illinois right now, we have 1.7 million people living in poverty in Illinois, and 22% women are living in poverty here. We have to work harder to make sure CEOs and people like Donald Trump do not become the next president, in other words, by his behaviors. Donald Trump became the president after he made comments about how he grappled on women and all that kind of negative type of commentary about women. He criticized the Fox News host, talked about some stuff, I don't even want to mention it, but the reality is that we know something has to be done. Here in Illinois, right now, you have women doing the same type of work that men are doing, but they're not receiving the same pay. As your governor, I plan to change that overnight. We have to do something about that. And I'm just being straight up with you. Sister Mita can attest to this. Police sergeant called us around 3 years ago. Her 13-year-old granddaughter was prostituting on the south side of Chicago. Nobody could find the young lady. It took them, she was missing for 2 weeks. We found the granddaughter in about an hour, right? And returned her back home. So the only thing I can talk about is some of my true stories as far as the work I've done to support women here in the state of Illinois. But as your governor, we will not tolerate any abuse of women, sexual abuse, or whatever the case may be. We have to really stand up. But most important, I'm not the only non-billionaire candidate here. I want to make that clear. And I might come down hard on the billionaires, but any one of the gentlemen up here would do a good job in Illinois to get rounded out of office. I want to say that, okay? Just being a perfect gentleman, all right? So, but at the same time, I want to make this absolutely clear to everybody. Let's work hard to make things easier for women and make it right, because we have older women out here too, because their pensions are being tampered with. They have to work 2 or 3 more jobs even though they're retired. We have to set aside some type of programs to help some of the senior women so they won't have to struggle as hard. So that's part of our plan. Thank you.
And Mr. Hardiman,
Yes.
we actually have a follow-up question with you. This is going to be the only time this evening that we have a follow-up question directed at one specific candidate.
Yes.
We grappled with whether to bring it up or not, but we felt it was our responsibility as women. In 2013, there was a highly publicized incident where you were arrested for allegedly physically abusing your wife. Right. News reports indicated that you pled guilty to misdemeanor battery and that your record was cleared after 1 year of court supervision. Many women in this room, as everyone has already said, have been directly or indirectly impacted by domestic violence. Given what we've seen in the news reports about your own history, should the women of Illinois trust you on issues of domestic violence and abuse?
Yes, without a doubt. I'm very transparent. I'm not just up here trying to talk and look good. That's public information. Yes, I was charged. All charges were dropped against me within 1 week. My wife, we've been together for 18 years. We're still together today. And if you want to talk to me in a group session, I will talk to you about that. I'm suing Fox News right now for defamation of character. I'm suing them for $12 million because some of the news articles got the stories wrong about me. I've never been convicted of a crime in my life. I had an incident with my wife that wasn't really about my wife. It was one of our stepchildren had the incident, but my wife got mad at me. I'll just tell you the truth here. And she went to the police, but all the charges were dropped within 1 week's time, and we've been together for 18 years. That's the best I can say to you. You can trust me as your governor. I'm not trying to sit up here. I'm the non-perfect candidate up here, but I've never been convicted of a crime in my life. I've done a lot of support helping women worldwide, nationwide. I've been in conferences with Queen Noor from Jordan. I've been volunteering in domestic violence shelters ever since that incident and before that incident. I helped 75 women turn their lives around from drug addiction before, and I rescued many women's lives. When I rescued them 12 women from the prostitution ring, you should have saw their faces. There were white women, Hispanic women, 1 Asian lady, and African-American young women. So I'm glad, I was expecting that to come up, and I didn't want to duck that issue. That's the reason why I showed up tonight. So hopefully, if you want to talk to me about it, I'm prepared to talk to you about it, okay? And hopefully it doesn't change your views of me. It's public information. It happened. I ran for governor when that happened in 2014 and still secured close to 30% of the state vote because I ran the first time to get my good name back within my career. So hopefully I addressed that. And my lawsuit is public information too. I'm suing Fox News for $12 million now for defamation of character because they put the wrong information in the newspapers and a lot of media outlets got things wrong. The situation when my wife got blown out of proportion because I'm a public figure, and when it hit the news, it went nationwide and it went international. So that's what happened in that situation. That's what happened.
Thank you.
It's being
All right.
honest with you. Yeah.
Yep. Our next.
Yeah,
By all means, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I need some water now.
A lot of water.
As women, we'll make sure everyone is well hydrated and taken care of. Our third question tonight is on an issue that's starting to be talked about a little bit more, but is new actually even to me. It's an issue called stealthing. The order that we're going to ask you to answer is Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Diber, Mr. Pritzker, Mr. Hardiman, and then Mr. Biss. Under Illinois law, rape is defined as such. A person commits criminal sexual assault if that person commits an act of sexual penetration and either 1, uses force or threat of force, 2, knows the victim lacks capacity to give consent, or 3, is a family member of the victim and the victim is under the age of 18, or number 4, the victim is the perpetrator is at least 17 years old, holds a position of authority or trust over the victim, and the victim is between the ages of 13 and 18. This definition of rape would not legally include stealthing, which is the intentional removal of a condom without the knowledge or consent of the party who only consented to a sexual act based on the use of a condom. Although this issue is not new, reports show that the act seems to be on the rise. Colloquially, we've heard about it in the committee more from a lot of younger women especially. This issue puts the partner who did not consent to engaging in a sex act without the condom at risk for sexually transmitted infections and pregnancy. As candidates, as governor, what criminal or civil changes to the law would you support if elected to protect victims of stealthing? And what groups are you consulting with now to ensure that Illinois women are protected under the law from sexual assault? Mr. Kennedy?
I have to say I'm not familiar with that term. The description you gave of it is probably the most disturbing thing I've heard during the campaign. I mean, I can't imagine that there are people that think that that's okay, but there is a place for them, and it's not free. They should be in jail. They should be in jail with whatever. I mean, in my mind, that's an order of magnitude worse than just about anything I've heard of. So I would push, I'd find model legislation, look around the United States. I wouldn't look to Springfield. I wouldn't look to Thompson Center. I'd look at other states, other cities, maybe other countries, and find out what the best-in-class law is that prevents that from occurring without penalty. And I would adopt that legislation in Illinois, and I'd do it in the first week.
Thank you. Mr. Diber?
Well, it's somewhat new to me that because I wasn't apprised of the issue. I've heard about it. I think it's, you know, it's an act of really non-consensual sex if it takes place, because it was a lack of a factor of trust here that's broken between two people. So, you know, you identified at the beginning these 4 factors that would define unconsensual sex. So I would be in favor of adding this as a 5th act of unconsensual sex. Selfing would be, I think, legitimate legislation to be initiated as a criminal act. I haven't consulted with any groups on it, but I will in the future because I want to learn more about it and find out the magnitude of the impact that this is having, especially with young groups. But you know, our sexually transmitted disease is a very, very significant factor that with young people today, especially on college campuses, that has to be dealt with. And I am a strong proponent of preventing those sexually transmitted diseases. And I'll just share something with you. Was in a local paper of mine that in many barber shops and salons in the greater St. Louis area, they're now making condoms available. And there's leaflets and pamphlets, et cetera, that are being passed out at those business locations to help prevent sexually transmitted diseases from taking place. So I think we all have to be self-conscious of it. It's something that I will look more into, but it definitely is a criminal act.
Thank you. Mr. Pritzker?
This is extraordinarily disturbing and real. This is, when it occurs, it's a sexual assault. It's an assault on, and it's battery, too. It's an assault on not only the physical person, but it's also an assault on one's health. And so, as far as I'm concerned, with a lack of consent, you know, and hearkening back to my days as an attorney, it amounts to rape if it's non-consensual. I must say it's a new issue to me, but I will also say that that it sounds familiar. So many sexual assaults are occurring that don't get reported, that have the quality of what you just described. It's often now being reported on college campuses, but again, this issue of being believed isn't being carried out even on college campuses. So there's no doubt that we need to make this behavior illegal to the extent that it's not already, though I must say that it is battery, it is assault, it is sexual assault as the elements that you described.
Thank you. Mr. Hardiman?
Yeah, well, no means no. When a woman says no, she means no. We have to support that process, but as leaders here, once we become the governor, we have to make sure we impose some different type of laws and work with the law enforcement statewide to address that issue. And if something like that happens, because spreading sexual diseases, like right now on the west side of Chicago, we have some of the highest rates of AIDS, the AIDS epidemic on the west side of Chicago and in the Inglewood community. Herpes is, you know, spreading all over the place. So if a man was have, you know, sexual intercourse with a lady and he takes off a condom, whatever the case may be, we need to make that a criminal act. We should make it a criminal act. I think if we look at the data, we can find out once we make it a, matter of fact, I would work with the members of the General Assembly to pass legislation to make that a criminal act. I think it's very important because then we can start measuring the data to make sure that we've had a reduction in those type of crimes against women. So that's the best thing we can do now because it's something relatively coming to the surface now, so we have to address it as a team. But I will put together a task force to really focus on that issue there and then present the results after the task force is set up. Okay?
Thank you. Mr. Biss?
Yeah, it's a horrifying thing. It's a non-consensual sex act. Of course, the definition of rape should be modified. It's something that I would be committed to working quickly with the really remarkable advocates around issues of sexual assault, like the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Exploitation that has done so much important work in Springfield. But I want to make sure that we do that work together with public health advocates, because this is an issue of non-consensual sex. It's an issue of violence, and it has the potential to create a public health crisis. And we all have to work together to fashion the correct legislation. But let us for one moment back up a second. This is about power. This is about domination. Let's understand that sexual assault and rape are about the establishment and the reification of a grotesque power dynamic. It's an extension of a patriarchy. And this act, stealthing, is an effort. It's an effort in a world where people have a sense of what they maybe can and what they probably can't get away with to assert their domination in yet another way. Let's name that. Let's acknowledge that that exists across our society. And when you have a woman executive at a firm who's earning $1 million a year, but if she were a man, she'd be earning $1.3 million, that's a power inequality. And when you have the incredible wage gap that exists for women of color, a gap approaching 50 cents, that's a power dynamic. When women are preyed upon and victims of violence in the workplace, that's a power dynamic. We have to view this as a holistic problem. We have to build holistic solutions. We have to name it everywhere, and we have to stand up against it every single minute.
Thank you. Our final question under the topic of violence against women relates to women in prisons. The order that you're going to answer will be Mr. Pritzker, Mr. Diber, Mr. Hardiman, Mr. Biss, then Mr. Kennedy. It has been widely reported that women are the fastest growing prison and jail population in America. In fact, between 1980 and 2014, the population of Illinois women's prisons grew by 767%. This does exceed the national growth rate of 700%. An estimated 98% of Illinois' women prisoners have histories of sexual and/or domestic abuse, and the vast majority of their pathways are paved by related trauma and crimes of survival. Furthermore, most female prisoners in Illinois are custodial parents of young children that they must leave behind. According to a report from the Chicago-based Women's Justice Initiative, our male-dominated justice system's failure to recognize the unique risks, needs, and pathways of women has had dangerous and harmful consequences for women and their families, and disproportionately affects communities of color. One result is high rates of incarceration among trauma survivors. Another result is women prisoners receive 3 to 5 times higher rates of discipline than male prisoners, and this is largely due to misinterpreted behaviors that are linked to their trauma. If you are elected governor, would you prioritize the issue of incarceration of women with histories of sexual and/or domestic trauma, and how? Would you commit to fully enforcing the recently passed bipartisan Women's Correctional Services Act that mandates Illinois state women's prisons adopt gender-responsive, trauma-informed, and family-centered practices? Mr. Pritzker?
Well, thank you, and there is no doubt that women and men need to be treated differently in terms of incarceration, and in fact, it was my running mate, State Representative Juliana Stratton, who was the chief sponsor of the Women's Correctional Services Act. The features of that act are important to call out, and you recognized a couple of them. Making sure that you've got trauma-informed staffing. Hugely important, because so many women come into the system having suffered from domestic violence, from sexual assault, and need to be able to recover as survivors from that. There's also the treatment of their children that needs to be addressed, because so many of those children also, you know, when you hear about the many situations of gun violence and other kinds of violence in society, it is often the children who are in situations of domestic violence, grew up in those, that turn out to be the adult perpetrators of those crimes. The bill that Juliana Stratton got passed is a national model. There's no other state that has something like it. We need to make sure that we're fully funding it. And under Bruce Rauner, with 2 years and 6 days without a budget, and the complete underfunding and misunderstanding, frankly, of the safety net that's necessary to have in this state, we're going to continue to have these challenges without addressing them. You can pass all the laws you want, but if you're not budgeting for them, if you're not paying for the services, nothing gets done. I'll reverse that as governor. We have got to have a governor who introduces and passes a balanced budget in this state. It's the important constitutional requirement of being governor that this governor has simply failed at, just one of many things.
Thank you. Mr. Diber?
Well, first and foremost, let's talk about preventive measures before we get to prison. And what we are doing as a state and as a society in helping with counseling and with services that would prevent a woman from being incarcerated, especially a woman who's a mother of children, and the support measures that they are needed not to get there. Let's talk about young girls that are 17, 18 years of age, that are expelled from school, that need to be in regional safe schools throughout our state, getting an education so that they, as young mothers, as teenage mothers, are there and caring for their children rather than continuing down the bad path that they may follow if they are not in school receiving those types of services. Then let's go if they are incarcerated. what happens? Do we need to just, shut the door and not give them the support? Not at all. How can they return to society? How can they return to their family to care for their children, leaving prison and coming back to that social setting? So there has to be trauma counseling that takes place for reentry into society. It is, in my opinion, it is just unquestionable that we would expect someone who's been through a great deal of struggle, first of all, that got to prison, then combated, 18 months, 24 months, whatever the term of sentence there, and you're going to turn them back into society without preparation. They need to come out and be transformed back to be able to care for their children in a caring way. So yes, as governor, I've been very involved with at-risk youth for the last 10 years. I'm proud of the fact that I've been successful with many and kept many out of prison.
Thank you, Mr. Diber. Mr. Hardiman?
Yeah, when women are incarcerated, women are very vulnerable. We must, as leaders here on this stage, when we become governor, we have to make sure that men are not around women when they're incarcerated as far as close contact. We need more women in the prisons to look after women, because we just had a situation somewhere in another state where some guards actually raped 2 women. They just settled, they had a court settlement recently. So that's something I would do as the governor, make sure that men are not in close quarters with women, and if they are, another woman has to be present. I also plan to convert some of these minimum security penitentiaries into institutions of higher learning here in Illinois, so we can make sure that we reduce the recidivism rate here in Illinois. That's very important, especially when women have been abused sexually, whatever, even domestic violence. We have to address that, take the bull by the horn. That's why I showed up tonight, because I'm not ducking any issues. As a governor, you have to be honest with people. You have to be straight up and transparent. But I know for a fact, from my history, I've been a protector all my life, and I plan to make sure we raise the bar for women here. And that's the reason why with my running mate, we're going to set forth the Leave No Woman Behind. And that means we're not going to leave any women behind that are incarcerated, women that are not incarcerated, and I plan to put a big dent in that number for 22% of women living in poverty. I plan to really change those numbers as your governor as well. So that's as far as the Hardiman and Avery plan to address that issue.
Thank you. Mr. Biss?
It's such a profound question, and I think it actually goes to a fundamental question that permeates our entire criminal justice system, which is that we do not treat people who are incarcerated as though they are fully human. We don't. We don't. And so the Women's Correctional Services Act is an important step. One of the first things that happened when I got to Springfield was my good friend, State Representative Robin Gable, fought to pass a bill to prohibit the shackling of women who are incarcerated during childbirth. Think about that one. Just yesterday, State Representative Kelly Cassidy, an extraordinary state rep, passed a bill out of the House to divert pregnant women from incarceration, to find mechanisms to divert women who are likely to give birth during the course of their prison term into a different mechanism of service. These are basic things. And the question about trauma-informed care in prison harkens back to the basic point of, if we actually viewed incarcerated people as though they were fully human and treated them as such and provided the services that are necessary, yes, trauma-informed care and the full complement of mental health services and substance abuse treatment services to actually address the root causes, as opposed to just trying to be tough and punitive for people who, let's be honest, in most cases are black and brown people who our society has chosen deliberately to marginalize. Let's do that for everyone, for all prisoners. Let's talk about sexual assault in prison. Let's talk about the fact that there is still corners of society today where it's socially acceptable to joke and wink about sexual assault in prison as though it's no big deal, as though the people there deserve it. That's obscene. We have to put a stop to that language. Let's talk about how transgender people are treated in prison. Let's talk about how non-binary people fit in this conversation we're having in the first place. Treat everyone like a human being, whether they're incarcerated or not.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
I think we've lost sight in Illinois of why we put people in prison. Is it to punish them? Is it restorative? Do we do it out of revenge? Are we trying to prevent additional crimes? Are we trying to rehabilitate? Why are they there? We need to wrestle with that as a society. Because it's not clear what we're doing in Illinois anymore. The vast majority of people in prison come from impoverished backgrounds. Poverty isn't the absence of money. Poverty is a whole constellation of pressures, incredible pressures. Pressures that make long-term thinking almost impossible, short-term thinking chaotic. Pressures that can destroy a family, wreck a marriage, create mental illness, force somebody into a situation where they're committing a crime of survival. And we're going to put somebody who committed a crime of survival in jail and have no plan for why they're there, teach them no skill, have nothing that organizes our thinking about their families if they're part of one. And then we think of the vulnerability. We know that the majority of people in prison suffer from mental illness, much of it untreated. They're incredibly vulnerable. Just this summer, there was someone who worked on our campaign for a period of time. And they're no longer part of the campaign, but they were a prison guard, took advantage of that relationship, went to jail for it. But who doesn't go to jail for it? How often does that happen? Who ends up getting away with those crimes? We have a big issue in our state around our prisons, why we have them, and why we do so little for the prisoners who are there.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our second topic for the evening, which is the topic of education. Our first question is going to address discrimination against girls in school. The order that you're going to answer, we're going to go Mr. Pritzker, Mr. Biss, Mr. Diber, Mr. Hardiman, and Mr. Kennedy. According to a 2014 study by the Department of Education, black girls are suspended from school at a higher rate than girls of other races and at a higher rate than white boys. There have been reported cases of black girls being suspended for braids, extensions, hair color, and having natural hairstyles. Yet girls who are not black get extensions, they color their hair, they wear it natural with no disciplinary consequences. Recent studies also show that black girls are often perceived as being older than they actually are, which causes them to be held to different standards by peers and adults. Statistics such as these give some indication that the playing field is not equal when it comes to school discipline and race. Repeated suspensions often affect a student's academic success and increase the likelihood that a student will drop out of school. How do you think this issue should be addressed in Illinois? What individuals or organizations would you commit to work with if you were elected governor to ensure that black girls have an equal chance of succeeding in school? Mr. Pritzker?
Discrimination is discrimination. We've got to make sure that within our schools, not only the teachers but administration are made aware of the discrimination that's occurring and that it's detected early so that it can be addressed. You know, when you think about the challenges, the many challenges that exist for people of color, children of color in schools, it shouldn't be that the teachers themselves or the administrators themselves are perpetrating the discrimination. So it's important for us to root that out. It's also important for us to make sure that the fundamental counseling that's required in schools, you know, most schools do not have available to them psychologists, social workers, anybody that's available for a child to come and even complain and get justice about these things. It's one of the biggest challenges that exists across our school system. When you close schools, when you take services out of schools, these are our community centers, are the schools in neighborhoods. We've got to build up those services, make them more available, in fact, and make it acceptable for children to report the discrimination that they're experiencing. But it's that training, it's that reporting, the detection that we've got to do early and make sure that every school across the state gets those services. When you don't fund a budget, when you don't have the safety net, when you don't believe in education, those are all things that Governor Rauner stands for, then you lose the ability to detect, treat, deal with the civil rights issues that occurs in schools.
Thank you. Mr. Biss?
We've got to end the school to prison pipeline. That is a thing that exists. It doesn't exist on the North Shore where I live, where my kids go to their neighborhood public school. It exists in black and brown communities in the state of Illinois. We passed a bill this year. I'm proud that it was signed into law. I was a proud co-sponsor to end the practice of booking stations. Police booking stations inside a school. What schools do you think those booking stations used to be in? What did the people in those schools, what did the students in those schools look like? What color were their faces? We've actually passed good legislation to stop this criminalization of discipline problems in schools, but there is lots more left to do. I've fought hard for those bills with groups like Voice, led by young people, activists who've seen firsthand what these kinds of racist practices do to communities of color, with the Community Renewal Society that's fought hard for sound policies, and there is lots left to do. I'd like to zoom out for a second, though. I used to teach math. And most people who were the colleagues of mine at the University of Chicago in the math department, they were white men like I was. And it was a real crisis in the field. It's still a real crisis in the field. And what you learn if you do the research is that as early as first and second grade, teachers treat boys and girls differently when it comes to math class. They send that signal saying math is for boys and not for girls, and they send it loud and extra clear to girls of color. So we have to fix every form of bias in our system. My running mate, Letisa Wallace, fought hard to pass an extraordinary bill to require training for all teachers to look out for unconscious bias. We have to fix this. We have to have our schools as a genuine engine for opportunity, not an engine to further systematize oppression.
Thank you. Mr. Diber?
Well, I deal with this firsthand because I receive kids who are not just suspended, but they're expelled. They're put out on the street by their district. Many of them hoping that they're not coming back because, you know, if you expel a student and they're 19 and they can't graduate by the time they're 21, a school district in Illinois doesn't have to readmit them, which is wrong. So their only hope for high school graduation is to receive a diploma through an alternative school, such as that I operate. But I did something bold a year ago to help these kids. I began a program, and it's called Give 30, and I encourage you to Google it. It's about mentoring young people of all races that are at risk, that are being looked at differently, and that are being put down in their school. And they are mentored by successful professionals for 30 minutes a week. That's where the Give 30 is coined from, to help these kids reestablish self-esteem that have been looked at as being less than others, because that's what it really takes for them to be successful. But part of the question asked is, what are you going to do about it as governor, and who are the groups that you're going to work with? Well, you know, every school administrator in Illinois has to have one academy a year. And this is a topic that's not an administrative academy. So I think it's one that ought to be introduced, and it ought to be introduced to the Illinois School Administrators Association, and it ought to be introduced to the Illinois Principals Association. And these two organizations that are lead professional development providers need to be very astute of this issue as well. But first and foremost, you know, the support that these kids get after they've been put out of school to re-enter school is tough. I want to tell you why it's tough, because they've been identified as a bad kid. So rebuilding their self-confidence to go back to school is a big job.
Thank you. Mr. Hardiman?
Yeah, first and foremost, you know, my ancestors came over to America in the bottom of slave ships. And I think that teachers nationwide should really have a lesson in the transatlantic slave trade, how my ancestors were brought. It took 2 months voyage from West Africa to the shores of America. Then my ancestors were placed on display for sale for $5, molasses, rum, watermelon, whatever they decided to sell our people for back then. Same thing happened to the Jews over in Nazi Germany. So it's not just about, my ancestors, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's a need for cultural sensitivity training, because there's no way in the world that you should look at an African-American female student no different than you look at any students out there. It doesn't matter how the lady wears her hair. This is what people do. This is what you call, this is a new generation. Used to have a hippie movement where people had, I used to have a big afro, and I went from the big afro to the box haircut, and now I'm bald-headed, So the point I'm making is that I would hate for somebody to tell me how I can wear my hair. My ancestors really did a lot of work in this country for us to get where we are today. Not just Irish people, Italian people, Jewish people, a lot of people did, Hispanic people, but the reality is that let people be themselves. Quit trying to make people be what you want them to be. That's just being straight up honest with you as your governor. So cultural sensitivity training is paramount when it comes down to teaching students out here. And women are struggling out here, big time. Women are struggling. We got a lot of dysfunctional families across the nation, and people are hurting. You have, like I said, 1.7 million people living in poverty in Illinois, and that's just the numbers we have. You have close to 900,000 people uninsured here in Illinois. We have to change the narrative in Illinois by supporting women all the way. And remember, I'm not just saying this because I'm running for governor. I'm saying this because it needs to happen. My track record working with women, I had one stumble in my life, but I picked myself back up, and I've been helping women all my life. And I can go get 100 women right now that will tell you that T.O. Hardeman took care of the business to help save them out of different situations. So with cultural sensitivity training, that's very important. And then quickly, I know it's time to end, that's the reason why the police need to change their narrative too. But I'll tell you about that later. All right. We'll deal with that. That's the best I can do.
Mr. Kennedy.
All right.
I mean, the examples that you threw out are sort of a violation. They're incredibly primitive. I mean, I have to say, and probably the greatest institution in the United States for social and emotional learning is here at the University of Illinois at Chicago. It was founded at Yale University. Maybe 7 years ago, it was relocated to UIC because they wanted to serve the population of a big and diverse state. And we're lucky to have them here. The fact that they're here, we don't access the great thinking that's available to that's a failure of leadership. That failure of leadership fails African Americans, people of color, left and right. You look at UIC, I bet 5-7 years ago, I bet UIC had less than 100 African American boys, men, who matriculated as freshmen from Chicago public schools. I bet it was less than 100 in the September of that year. We totally undereducate kids in Chicago. Less than 13% of everybody at CPS is qualified to go to a place like UIC without remedial education. And they can't afford remedial education because it takes too long and the costs are too high, and that drives a geometric progression in the likelihood that they'll drop out of college before getting a degree, but after racking up enormous debt. We have those terrible outcomes because we pay for our grade schools and our high schools with local property taxes, which robs us of the opportunity to have the wraparound services, those people who are not the teachers, the great parapros that are saving our kids' lives. We can't have them in our schools because we pay for our schools with the local property tax and not with the progressive income tax. And that's what we need to do if we're going to solve any of these problems.
Thank you. Our last question under the topic of education deals with Title IX. And I'm going to read the definition of Title IX just so I know I would need it. Title IX says, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to the discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." And the order for this question will be Mr. Diber, Mr. Biss, Mr. Hardeman, Mr. Kennedy, and Mr. Pritzker. In February 2017, President Trump reversed the guidelines that denied federal Title IX funds to schools with policies that stated students must use the bathrooms or changing rooms that match their biological or birth gender. In Illinois, it is illegal to discriminate on the basis of gender identity in housing, employment, and public accommodations. However, how this covers school or students in public schools has been debated, and the rights of trans students have been attacked. In May 2016, parents in District 211 filed a lawsuit arguing that by accommodating a transgender student, the school district violated their children's right to privacy. So why is this important? A 2011 survey by the National Center for Transgender Equality found that out of 233 transgender people in Illinois, 45% have committed suicide, or had considered suicide, excuse me. A 2007 study by the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network showed 87% of transgender students reporting being verbally harassed, and 53% had reported being physically harassed. As governor, what steps would you and your administration take to ensure that trans students feel included and safe in our schools?
Well, let me begin by saying that I've always upheld the Title IX law. I described some of that in my opening statement. But I think the issue we're getting at here is the real issue of students being bullied in school. And all students are entitled to a safe environment to go to school, no matter what their gender is, and they should not be perceived any different. And whatever their choice is with their transgender, I've worked with students and parents in my jurisdiction to ensure that. So, you know, we have to ensure safety for children. And as I mentioned, you know, the whole issue of the support systems that we have for kids to go to and to feel open and to report how they're being treated at school is so, so important. And I believe that begins with having an educated administrative staff. And if you do not have an administrative staff in your school that understands the needs of all the students there, then you're going to have the situations as has been described about kids that are not treated fairly and the kids that are let's say, harassed. So I've worked on that as an administrator, and I uphold those students' rights.
Thank you, Mr. Biss.
Being transgender, being gender nonconforming, being gender fluid isn't a choice. It's an identity. What the Trump administration did was disgusting. And we ought to have a statewide bathroom law in the state of Illinois. There have been school districts that have done great things, that have enacted strong policies. District 211 was one of them, with tough school board members who stood up for the students in that district in the face of real bullying from a fringe in the community. But that shouldn't be an isolated act of bravery from a few school board members. That should be something that the state sets as its clear policy, so this battle doesn't have to get fought again and again and again and again in each of the 800+ school districts in the state of Illinois. This is a question about accepting people for who they are, loving them for who they are, lifting them up as equal participants in the fabric of our lives and our communities and our schools. It's about mental health. It's about suicide. This is a fundamental defining civil rights battle of our era. And if you look at the incredible successes of the fight for LGBTQ equality, they occurred because more and more and more brave people who were victims of discrimination and bullying were willing to and brave enough to stand up. And so I salute the extraordinary trans activists who have been standing up to educate the public. I've been incredibly proud to work closely with the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance. And as governor, I am going to lift up those issues loudly and clearly with openly transgender people on my cabinet, respected, treated as equals, and included in the fabric of every minute of every life in this state.
Thank you. Mr. Hardiman?
Yeah, this issue, I support Title IX. And like I said earlier, I saved the life of 2 transgender women in the Austin community on the west side of Chicago. 2 guys were in a relationship with some transgender women, and when the community found out the guys wanted to take their lives, and I got the call, and we intervened and saved their life. I grew up around bullies all my life, and I'm one of them guys that didn't never succumb to the bullies because we had to stand up for ourselves growing up in the projects here in Chicago. So I stand as governor to make sure that nobody will be bullied, nobody would, and hopefully if we see something's going on in a particular school, I would set forth some measures where they don't just report it to the school administration, they make sure that information comes to our administration as well so we can save lives, because we can prevent some suicides if we have information early enough. We need that information early enough, because a lot of times when people are bullied, they refuse to tell people they're scared. The bully will tell them if you say something that what they're going to do. So we have to set forth policy and programs that protect transgender people. Now you have to understand, I've been standing up for the transgender community and the gay community way before it became a big movement. I'm talking about in the 80s, in the 90s. My record reflects for itself. I grew up in a community where you had gay people. It was like something a lot of people didn't even talk about back then. See, I'm a straight man myself, let me just say that. But this is the thing. Now, I just got to be honest with just the way I talk. This is the thing here. If a person is gay, that's their right. You shouldn't abuse them because they believe in something different than what you believe. Like if a person is a Catholic, a Muslim, that's their right. So we have to stand up and champion the cause for the transgender people now, because I don't even like using all those different names. I would like to just say we all are human beings. All of us are human beings. When the people were killed in Las Vegas, the people were killed in Orlando, I saw them as fellow Americans, not as gay people. I saw them as fellow Americans. That's what makes our country okay, because we can be ourselves. And as your governor, I plan to stand up for people that are being bullied out here and make sure we have the right policies to support what I'm talking about. Okay.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there's so much that you can teach your kids in life. I mean, it's fantastic to be their first teacher. But there's so much we can learn from that generation. I have 4 kids. They all went to big public high school. This conversation would be absurd to them. They're so comfortable. The incredible changes in our society. The idea that some adult would tell a transgender kid what bathroom that they should use, that would be absurd to everybody in high school today. It just would. Let's worry about those kids and their reaction. They can guide us, they can lead us. And we should see this movement as part of some of the glories of the United States. That Title IX was incredible. I had older sisters who couldn't play sports, and younger sister who was required to play a sport on the same fields my older sisters were prevented from playing on. I had 4 kids, 3 of them are girls, they all went to New Trier, a big public high school. They played on 25 collective sports teams. Those girls, my daughters, would never have played at New Trier had their grade schools and middle schools not been required to teach them the skills to play sports later on. There's an incredible evolution, full participation. And just as we've done it for women in our lifetime, so too should we do it for everybody. Let's embrace one of the great stories of our country's history, Title IX, and extend it to everybody. I'm part of a big family. I got everything you've ever heard of in our family. And we shouldn't make people's life any harder than it is. I mean, that's my position. Love them all.
Thank you. Mr. Pritzker?
Well, we must honor everyone, especially our children, for who they are. I think that principle is not just a principle that my parents imbued in me as part of their strong belief in economic social justice, but also it's a key value of my faith. Now, I was out there fighting for the LGBTQ community back when the Pride Parade in Chicago was a protest movement, not a celebration. Back when, before the name Equality Illinois became the name of the organization that has stood up and fought for marriage equality and other LGBTQ rights, it was called the Illinois Federation for Human Rights. And in its earliest incarnation, I was a supporter, a protester on their behalf. And many of those original founders are supporters of my campaign. Now, with those decades behind me of supporting LGBTQ rights, I also ran the Illinois Human Rights Commission, where we had to stand up for the civil rights of people who get discriminated against in employment, in housing, in public accommodations. So I tell you all that because you want a governor who's got a history of standing up for those rights. I have a transgender family member who I'm so proud of, so proud that she has become who she is and has done so much for the transgender community. I believe that we have to stand up and protect our children, that we should allow them to live as they are, who they are, and be accepted as such.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our third topic, which is the topic of employment. Our only question on this topic is on the topic of equal pay. The order that you're going to answer will be Mr. Diber, Mr. Hardiman, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Pritzker, and Mr. Biss. The Institute for Women's Policy Research projects that the gender pay gap will not close until 2065 in the state of Illinois. According to Pew Research, for every $21 a white man earns, Asian women earn $18, white women $17, black women $13, and Hispanic women $12. Among the many reasons for the pay gap include the time many women must take away from their professions for family and medical leave, and the fact that being asked salary history contributes to lower wages being paid when moving to a new job. 3 states currently have paid family and medical leave, and New York will become the 4th state in 2018. Illinois is not one of those states. If you are elected as our next governor, would you support paid family and medical leave? If so, how would you respond to critics who would argue that such policies would hurt businesses in the state? Mr. Diber?
Well, yes, I'd support paid family and medical leave. I think it's the right thing to do. I think that Illinois has, not been in a leadership position for some time on these types of issues. And how do you answer this to naysayers of it? Well, you answer it by it's the right thing to do, and it would make a better employee. And it's going to put a more equal playing field for all genders. I really am concerned that we got to wait till 2065 to equalize pay here. Because that's like the next century, you know. And as being governor, I'm not going to be governor until 2065, so I have to get it done a whole lot sooner. So, I think that's all part of an equal rights amendment that I said that I would support and see that it got passed. And part of the equal rights amendment is equal pay for equal worth. And there shouldn't be people making $18 to $13 an hour. They're all doing the same job. So that just needs to be addressed in a hard, fast manner, and I will do so as governor. So I'm always disturbed when I hear these things. I see them. But I'll tell you something that I'm proud of is the very fact of trying to provide opportunities for females in administrative capacity and trying to see that they are treated equal to a male in the workplace. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hardiman?
Yeah, everybody sitting here tonight came from a woman. It should be a no-brainer that we should make sure that women receive full pay on the medical leave. We can't get around that fact. A nation that does not respect their women will not be a nation much longer. So as your governor, we're not going to wait until 2065. When I become governor in 2019, we're going to change that immediately. And I said it previously. If I see where women are doing the same job that men are doing and they're making less money, we're going to change that immediately. That's very important that we push forth those type of policies because for far too long, even I'm running as a man for governor, we need women to run for governor as well. For far too long, we've had men dominating the governorship in Illinois. Some people may have a problem with the way I talk, but I'm a straightforward individual. I don't play no games with the public. We need women in positions of power to make the changes. I spoke at an all-white audience at an environmental forum about 2 weeks ago, and they say, Teal, what is your plan to deal with racism and white supremacy and discrimination? I say the solution is standing right in front of you. Vote for me for governor, and we can end it together. We can end it together. I'm being honest with you. So the reality is that this is a no-brainer. This is the point I'm trying to make. It's a no-brainer. This is the year 2017. Why is it that women still don't get paid the same wages that men make? That's because you got men sitting somewhere that are dictating policy against women that are not allowing the women to be free. So as your governor, I plan to address that issue head on and make the sweeping changes in policies in Illinois. Thank you all again.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
I'm passionate about that, passionate.
So I'd support paid family medical leave. And if somebody tried to argue with that, I'd say that the interests of an individual company are important, but the interests of our larger economy is even more important. If we don't create an economic system that allows women to be full participants, we're going to rob the economy of 50% of its potential. And there's no counter-argument to that works in my mind. The idea that we wouldn't support women who are having children, I mean, honestly, what are we going to punish women for becoming moms? That's going to be okay in America? Because that's ridiculous. I would say this, what we did at the Mart, when I got there, I think there was one woman who was an officer of the company, meaning had a title of vice president. And by the time I left, I would guess there were 15, maybe more. And what we would do is we would put everybody in a ranking in the entire company. Every year we would rank every employee. And you would be in a grade, and there might be 30 people in your grade, there might be 10, there might be 5. And we would grade every job, and we would then compare people in that grades as to whether the average between men and women, the average between white and black, the average between white and black, Latino, Asian, and we could see where there were differentials. And there was rapid response to that. So we could bring parity and equality quickly. It was a very helpful tool to managers and to the HR department and to the executive team. There were executive vice presidents, half of which were women. That chart was shared with them every month, so they understood what was happening company-wide. Just disclosure within an organization is effective.
Thank you. Mr. Pritzker?
Once and for all, women deserve equal pay for equal work. We need pay equity in this state. And it's not easy, there's no doubt about that, but we can do it. We have the ability to get these big things done that need to get done. First of all, once and for all, let's pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Let's make Illinois the 37th state and make sure we make this an amendment to our U.S. Constitution. But that doesn't go far enough. We've got to make sure, of course, paid family leave, because we're currently discriminating against women without paid family leave. We should not leave women out of the workforce. We've got to make sure that we're providing child care assistance. Remember, this is a governor that cut child care assistance by 90% in this state. I've 25 years, I have fought to expand the ability of parents to provide child care and preschool all across the state and all across the nation. We have to make sure in this state we've got universal preschool and child care. And then we need to raise the minimum wage, because that also will help close the gap. More women, many more women than are part of the population are receiving the minimum wage. If we raise the minimum wage to $15, that doesn't take everybody out of poverty, and it isn't really a living wage yet. It used to be called that. But we've got to do it. It will help with pay equity. Now, finally, you know that there has been a bill that's passed called the No Salary History Bill, and this governor, of course, vetoed it. Now, there's a move to overcome his veto. But all of us should be making sure that we are fighting hard to get it overridden in the Senate. I believe that Senator Biss is going to face this next week, I guess. We have got to make sure that we make our voices heard on that issue and finally get pay equity in this state.
Thank you, Mr. Pritzker. Mr. Biss?
I learned about this issue at home. My parents are both in the same profession, both violinists, and unlike was pretty common in that generation, my father stepped back. My father made sacrifices and supported my mother advancing in her career, and I watched as she was paid less and mistreated, and then eventually told, because she was a performing artist, that by the time she was in her 50s, she was less desirable, unlike men in their 50s and 60s and 70s. I saw this at home, and that's why I introduced the no pass paycheck bill, which when we override Governor Rauner's veto in a week and a half, will mean Illinois has the strongest pay equity law in the country, the strongest pay equity law of any state in the union. And I didn't do that by just checking a box somewhere. I sat down with State Representative Anna Moeller and looked around the country for the best practices and worked with women employed to toughen that bill and wrote the strongest bill we could find, and then went around the legislature and pushed and pushed and pushed until we had the votes. Anna overrode the veto in the House yesterday, and I plan on doing it the week after next. I'm also the lead sponsor of the Paid Family Leave Act in the Illinois Senate, because it's barbaric that we don't have family leave in this country. What other country with any kind of economy, anything like America's economy, doesn't have paid family leave? It is preposterous. And when the business so-called community tells us that it's anti-business, come on. Come on. Growing the workforce is pro-business. And frankly, fairness is more important than anything else. And so as we think about these crucial changes, I would ask you, who was in the legislature fighting to make them happen? Who took the initiative to make sure that bill got introduced? Who pushed their colleagues to make sure that bill got passed? That's the person who's going to be the governor to make sure we have paid family leave in the state of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Biss. All right. We have time for one more question. We're going to talk about health care, specifically reproductive rights. The order that you're going to answer this question is Mr. Pritzker, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Biss, Mr. Diber, Mr. Hardiman. We have seen in recent years that some Democrats in the Illinois legislature are not committed to reproductive choice for people who can become pregnant. Some Democratic legislators outright oppose access to abortion services, and we currently have no Republicans in the Illinois legislature who are committed to protecting reproductive choice. Are there circumstances in which you would negotiate restrictions on reproductive choice? If so, what would those circumstances be? And if not, what words of reassurance can you provide that, if elected, the people of Illinois can rely on knowing that their right to make their own reproductive health choices will not be compromised? Mr. Pritzker?
What assurance? Well, for decades, I have stood with women. I was marching for women's rights and women's health and reproductive rights almost, I bet, before anybody on the stage, but as a kid with my mother in the 70s, and I have not stopped. I was not just marching in Washington, in Springfield, in Peoria in January, or in April in Springfield at the Women's March. I was marching decades ago with some of the people in this audience, actually, decades ago. You want somebody that's got a real history of standing up for reproductive rights. And no, I do not believe that there are circumstances in which I would limit a woman's right to control her own body.
Thank you. Excuse me. There we go, Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, no negotiation, zero negotiation. Those decisions are between a woman and her doctor. That's it. I'm done.
Next. Mr. Biss.
I'm going to try to keep this one short, I guess. I'm 100% pro-choice. No exceptions, period, and no negotiation. It's a fundamental civil right. I don't negotiate on civil rights. Now, I will tell you that you're absolutely right in the question. There are Democrats in Springfield who are 100% anti-choice, and there are Democrats who are wishy-washy. And there are no longer Republicans who are pro-choice, though there used to be. We got a lot of work left to do, and we have been very good at stopping bad legislation. but it's been a challenge for us to pass good legislation. We had to fight like hell to get House Bill 40 on Governor Rauner's desk. We fought, and we fought, and we argued, and we persuaded, and we cajoled, and we marched, and we begged, and we eventually just barely got those votes. I was fighting tooth and nail inside the legislature to make sure we got those votes. I was the lead sponsor of a bill a couple years ago amending the so-called Right of Conscience Act. We used to have a law in Illinois that said that a woman did not have the right when she went to the doctor to get full medically accurate information about what options were available to her if the conscience of the provider said, don't tell this woman the truth. And when we had a woman by the name of Mindy Swank from the Quad Cities come to Springfield to talk about the vicious treatment she had had at a hospital that told her instead of terminating her non-viable pregnancy, she should go home and bleed. Think about that for a second. That was legal in Illinois at the time. When she came to testify in support of our bill to fix that in the Senate Judiciary Committee, there was one woman on the committee. We passed that bill with that woman and other women in the legislature leading the way to get the votes. We're going to keep on finding those votes, but we cannot let up for a second because the forces on the other side are fighting hard, and we are barely winning at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Diber.
Well, I made a statement that I would have signed HB 40 if I'd been governor, because I don't believe that we can return to pre-Roe versus Wade. We've came too far in this country of looking at what a woman's rights are and the whole health care of women. And with all that said, I've also publicly said that personally I'm pro-life. And the day of the Women's March, I was walking over the Capitol to speak, and a woman was walking alongside of me, and she said, you know, Bob, we've heard what you've said about being pro-life, and I want you to know that most of us are pro-life. But we want the right to make the decision as to what we do, and we do not want government to interfere. I said, well, that's exactly where I am at, and that's why I said that I would sign HB 40. So I wanted to make that clear. I also want to make it clear about my position of being pro-life, because I don't believe being pro-life it begins at birth and it goes all the way till the time of the end of your life and everything along the way, okay? And we need to take care of people, and that's something as Democrats that we do. I believe in helping people that are sick, that are suffering. I believe in helping people who are incarcerated, that have disease and illness. I believe in helping the elderly who are sick and suffering, and that's all part of my pro-life platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hardiman.
No, I support House Bill 40. It's time to stop bullying women. If a woman decides, that's up to her God and her doctor. And I just would say that the same as Chris Kennedy said. I'm not going to talk long about it, but it's public record that I support House Bill 40. A woman should have a right to choose, and that's the only thing I'll say about that.
Thank you.
All right.
Now, we had to cut a few questions tonight. I would prefer that we all stay here for 5 more hours to discuss these issues. I don't think we all want to do that. I have 2 very quick yes/no questions. If we send you via your campaign the remaining questions we couldn't ask, would you respond and allow us to distribute?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yes from everyone? Great. And our final question for you, we at She Votes Illinois, we're committed to working with our state elected officials to help prioritize the issues most important to all the women of Illinois. If you are elected governor of Illinois in 2018, will you commit to meet with the board of She Votes Illinois before entering office to help you prioritize the needs of the women of Illinois? We can just go down the line.
Yes.
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 Emphatically, yes.
And gentlemen, you are on multiple cameras, so we will follow up with you. I want to thank all of our candidates for your very thoughtful responses. We did not give any of these candidates any of these questions beforehand, so I'm even more impressed with that knowledge. on how many of you answered many of the questions. We're going to ask for a closing statement from each of you. After that, we have invited all of you to stick around, meet with our audience, and in the back of the room, we have, I believe each of your campaigns has a table set up where you can learn more about each campaign. Many of our amazing sponsors have tables set up as well, and we encourage you to learn more about the wonderful organizations who came out to support this event tonight. And best of all, we have hot cocoa and hot apple cider in the back, both sides of the room. So for our closing statements, we're just going to go in the opposite order of the opening statements. So we're going to start with you, Mr. Pritzker.
Thank you. And thanks to Liz and to all of you for toughing it out tonight for so long, and to the organization sponsoring. Look, we've got a bunch of very fine candidates running for governor on the Democratic ticket. And there's an awful lot of agreement among us. You heard it as we went down the line. So many things that I think we'd find common ground upon. But I think an important thing for all of you to do to distinguish is to ask the question, what were the candidates doing before they were running for public office to really make people's lives better in the state of Illinois? What were they doing before they were in the public eye and making promises running for governor or running for other public office? What were they standing up for? And did they do big things to make real change? And I told you about some of the things that I've worked on and gotten done, where tens of thousands of kids in low-income school districts now get school breakfast, and thousands of kids get quality preschool and quality childcare because of the work that I've done. And thousands of jobs have been created in a nonprofit small business incubator, and turning around the Illinois Human Rights Commission to make sure that people got justice fairly and swiftly after the Republicans had really decimated that agency. And standing up and building a Holocaust museum to teach people to fight against bigotry and hatred and intolerance. We have big things that we need to get done in this state. And I have decades of experience standing up for women's rights and LGBTQ rights and civil rights more broadly, and decades of experience getting big things done. I think you need a governor who's actually got that experience, both in government and outside government. I hope you'll support me in the movement to change this government in the state of Illinois and beat Bruce Rauner.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
What's that? Is that me?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Mr. Kennedy.
You were drowned out by JB's applause.
Hold your applause, everyone.
Well, not now. Thank you. You know, there's so much going on in our country now. I think it's really hard to look the other way anymore. I mean, I think it's impossible. We have a president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world. 15 women have come forth and accused him of sexual assault. One of our leading news networks, the entire executive team and the on-air personality has been wiped out because of a culture of rampant sexual abuse. We have a leader of Hollywood, movie business that forms our own views of who we are as Americans, defines us for ourselves, who's a serial rapist. That's our leadership. That's what's going on in our country. I have a daughter who was born, we have 4 kids, the last one, the youngest, born 1998. Since she was born, 17 million women have been raped or been the victims of attempted rape. That's the country that we live in. That's the greatest country in the world. That needs to end. Some states got to be first. Some states got to stand up. Some states got to rise to the occasion. This isn't going to be me. It's going to be the powerful women that I'm going to surround myself with. I've surrounded myself with all my life. and they're going to lead. I'm going to be their ally. That's how it's going to work. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Mr. Hardiman.
Yes, well, I'm running for governor. I'm one of the only candidates up here that stood up against police brutality. As a matter of fact, there's a House Bill 4041 now, which is a recall legislation that can recall people like Mayor Rahm Emanuel when he covers up a homicide of African-American youth here in Chicago. I'm running because we also have a 2020 plan which represents a perfect vision for the good people of Illinois. So I plan to sign House Bill 453 so we can generate new funding in this state so we can overcome some of these issues we have, so we can support a $50 million capital construction projects for central and southern Illinois, because people down in southern Illinois, the people are hurting down there as well. I'm also running to make sure we support the senior citizens, the college students, the women, the ex-offender community, the recovering community, and everybody in Illinois that needs a boost. And I talked with a few of the candidates up here. We all have a track record, but most people with a track record don't brag on their track record. They just do the good work for the people. That's what it's all about. T.O. Hardiman is sincere. I ran for governor in 2014 and secured close to 30% of the state vote. I would like you all to help me make history by having me become the first African-American governor of the state of Illinois, not just because I'm African-American, because I'm qualified. I've done a whole lot of work statewide. I know enough people in this state to win this primary. I know about 400,000 people in the state of Illinois. I just got to get them to get out there and vote. That's important. I would like to be seen as the non-billionaire candidate, though. I want everybody to look at me as an alternative I'm not going to get caught up in that, but you know what I'm talking about. So the reality is I'm a good leader for the state of Illinois, and I plan to have a very diverse administration to make things happen in Illinois. Another policy that I'm putting forth is free college tuition for college students up into the bachelor's degree level. That's important because college students are really struggling out here to pay back their student loans. I'm also the only candidate up here that worked for minimum wage many, many years ago, so I know how it feels to get a minimum wage check. So I'm universal, and I support everybody, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all human beings. HardimanForIllinois.org. Check my website out. Thank you all. Right on.
Thank you, Mr. Diber.
Well, for 38 years, I've done public service in education, 28 as a teacher, the last 10 as an administrator. 22 of those 38 years, I've served in local government at all levels, from city councils, township supervisor, 2 terms on a county board, and 10 years as a countywide elected official. And I'll tell you something that's very important that's lacking in government today, is that each and every time I've served in public office for 22 years, I've never looked at it as a pastime. I've looked at it as my job. And governing is an art. It's an art to be able to get along with people. It's about compromise. It's about collaboration. It's about moving agendas forward. It's about having vision as to what you see. And my vision of Illinois is this. It's a state in which all of Illinois has good schools. It's a state in which all of Illinois has safe neighborhoods. It's a state in which all of Illinois has good paying jobs. And that's how you unite a state. And that is how you bring it together. I am the first person in 20 years that has had the courage from Southern Illinois to run for governor. And despite all the calls that I get daily to drop out because I have no money. And people say, why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this? The answer is simple. I want to leave Illinois better in 4 years. In 2022, I want Illinois to have a balanced budget. I want it to be fully funding its schools, which it has not ever done. I want the pension systems to be solvent. And I want the office of governor to have dignity. And to do that, you have got to have someone who understands public service and what it is about. You know, our president and our governor never served a day in public office, so what does that do for you?
Thank you. Mr. Biss?
Liz, thank you for the work that you did to put this together. Thank you to the extraordinary many organizers, my great friend, Representative Ann Williams, and others. Thank you to the organizations, the Women's March and Indivisible and the others. This is the future of the Democratic Party. This is the future of politics in America if we choose to get it right. The Women's March to Springfield was not just a beautiful, powerful day of demonstration. It was accompanied by the unveiling of an extraordinary agenda written by women's organizations. Bill after bill after bill to change society, create an equal society with equal opportunity and equal pay, without the kind of scourge of violence and harassment that we so often endure. That was done by women. We talked a lot today about power. We talked a lot today about issues that are about who's in control and who is being controlled, who has authority and who is being dominated. And when we ask ourselves how we're going to win these battles, enact these fundamentally transformative policies, the question we need to be asking ourselves is, how do you change the way power is wielded in American politics? That's what these organizations are all about, and that's how we are going to win. And we have to ask ourselves, with that giant question coming down the train tracks, what kind of Democratic Party we're going to be. Are we going to be a billionaire party, or are we going to be a party for the rest of us? Are we going to have elections, or are we going to have auctions? I'm running for governor because it is time for the extraordinary leaders of this extraordinary movement to take control, to build a state and a country that works for the rest of us. I would be honored to continue standing with you in that fight. It would mean the world to me to have your support. Thank you.
Now, as I know we've all been waiting to do, let's give a warm round of applause to all of our candidates.
You know, can I just, we've been to a bunch of forums. We've been to a bunch of forums, and
Yes.
maybe with unanimous consent from those that are participating, we'd give Tio 30 seconds, because it seems like it would be terrible to rob this audience of his important story.
Well, you want to hear it? I'll keep it simple. I'll say
Did
this.
I
No,
skip?
No, you got to give me permission first.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Please, you may have 2.5 minutes.
No, I don't need
Wait,
that.
go ahead.
Not just a story I've been telling since we've been on the road. This is my humorous side. This is what's going to happen with Bruce Rauner in Illinois because of the gentleman up here. There was this airplane that was about to crash, and you only had 4 passengers on the airplane with 3 parachutes. You had a pilot who was Chris Kennedy, you had a young T.O. Hardeman who was a Boy Scout, and you had a young J.B. Pritzker on the plane, and Bruce Rauner was on the plane, but you only had 3 parachutes. So the pilot, Chris Kennedy, took the first parachute, he jumped, leaving J.B. Pritzker, T.O. Hardeman, and Bruce Rauner. Bruce Rauner, he gangstered the other parachute, and he jumped, leaving 1 parachute and 2 passengers. So J.B. went to the corner of the plane and said he's going to pray and ask God to help him. And I tapped him on his shoulder. I said, you know what, J.B., that guy Bruce Rauner, he didn't take the parachute, he took my backpack. All right? So check this out. So the moral of the story, J.B. and myself, we jumped to safety, and you know the rest of the history there, okay? Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Have a great evening, everybody.
You're watching Hard Lens Media.